loyalty, strength, courage. These are the three traits that define the most iconic enemy in the Dark Souls franchise, the Black Knights. They're not only some of the most formidable fighters in lore, but also the most memorable enemies in the series. The fact that an enemy still remains as the poster boy for the series to this day among the fanbase is why Dark Souls 1 still matters. The Black Knights were faithful warriors to the Lord of Sunlight, Gwyn. They fought alongside him in the War with the Dragons, as we see in the opening cutscene. Upon further inspection, these knights in the cutscene have silver armor rather than the charred black armor we see in-game. These Black Knight variants had their armor charred during the purge of the Chaos Demons, giving them their distinct charcoal-like coloration of their armor. The armor also grants the wearer increased fire resistance based on the armor stats. Some of the knights were also burned who followed Gwyn to link the First Flame, resulting in the same black coloration. According to their armor description, they would wander the world as disembodied spirits afterwards. We can see these same spirits as we approach the kiln in-game. The knights were capable of wielding a different array of weapons, including greatswords, ultra greatswords, great axes, and halberds, with some holding shields in their offhand. Besides their story of bravery and loyalty to Gwyn, the knights have a recognizable aesthetic sporting charred black plate armor with spiked embellishments around the neck region of the armor and on the helmet. They are often found standing still before spotting the player. They appear to have an automaton-like presence standing guard. They have a stoic posture when fighting the player, as well as have a more formalized style of fighting versus the more frantic enemies such as the common hollows and hollow soldiers, for example. They fight like honorable knights, even in death. Their intimidating presence was even the focus for a large amount of the promotional material for the game, cementing their presence from the very start. Mechanically speaking, the Black Knights serve as the first mini-boss of Dark Souls 1. The first one that can be encountered is the one in the Undead Burg standing alone facing away from the player. For first-time players, this will likely be the most challenging obstacle yet. They can damage the player quickly and have much more health than the basic enemies the player has come into contact with so far. One of the reasons why they're a fantastic mini-boss is that there are many ways of dispatching them. They can be parried, backstabbed, exploited to be pushed off a ledge, or finding a safe spot to throw bombs or shoot arrows at them. As the player experience grows, they can approach the Black Knights with more confidence. As mini-bosses, they serve as great introductions to the parry and backstab mechanics in particular. Their sword swings are very telegraphed, making parrying easy once the player can read their timing and tells. They can be backstabbed easily by circling around them as well. For me personally, learning backstabbing through the Black and Silver Knights was the missing link to me figuring out and getting better at the combat of the game. They were the enemy where everything started to click for me, cementing them forever in the muscle memory of the game. Speaking of the Silver Knights, the Black Knights are still able to distinguish themselves from the Silver Knights not only through their aesthetic, but through their weaponry. The Black Knights wield larger and more aggressively designed variants of the Silver Knight weapons, those being the sword and spear respectively. These weapons were likely used to take on the demons in particular. The Silver Knights are seen more as regular enemies since they can be found in groups and in larger numbers within a level versus the Black variants. Transitioning from the Black to the Silver Knights on a first playthrough of the game is an effective way of showcasing the player's growth in power and skill. The player can take on a room of 3 of them to aid Siegmeyer, where just before one knight might have posed an insurmountable threat or obstacle. Never has this occurred in the series where the mini-boss becomes a regular enemy and then transitions back to a mini-boss again in the late game. It also offers a distinct difference between the common enemy variants through the Silver Knights and the mini-boss variants through the Black Knights in both aesthetic, function, and placement. The Silver Knights are more of a guarding presence, while the Black Knights can be seen as a more offensive presence, especially when they return to the Undead Asylum. Their presence in the asylum can be interpreted as them hunting the chosen undead or stopping them from getting the peculiar doll. The Black Knights only seem to guard Gwyn in the Kiln of the First Flame, which makes sense since they answer to him alone. As a repeat mini-boss, their presence can be interpreted as them hunting undead in Lordran in a multitude of locations, including the Undead Burg, Undead Parish, Darkroot Basin, the Catacombs, Tomb of the Giants, and the Undead Asylum. This sort of reminds me of the Nazgul depiction from the Lord of the Rings films. Quote, "They will never stop hunting you," as Aragorn states, is very similar to the behavior I interpret from the Black Knight's positioning and placement in Dark Souls 1. What might be the most interesting gameplay aspect of the Black Knights are their item drops and non-respawning nature. This means that for most of the game, there is a slim chance they will drop their weapons for the player upon death. Black Knight weapons are incredibly powerful, making them ideal in speedruns or overpowered gear in the early game. Having a slim chance to getting these weapons can turn the tide of a speedrun or playthrough of the game for the player, especially with the halberd variant. This concept of an easy power grab for players has not been as effectively implemented or attempted by means of a mini-boss in the series since, in my opinion. This places a great deal of importance on the mini-boss not only for the souls that would drop from them, but from the items as well. The legacy of the Black Knights would live on in Dark Souls 2 and 3 as well. In Dark Souls 2, we do not encounter them personally, but can find their Greatsword and Ultra Greatsword. The Greatsword can be found in the Iron Keep, which is fitting since the Iron King is associated with Gwyn's Lord Soul. The item description tells the knights remained as strong as ever despite being charred by the flame, further aiding their badass nature and the virtues they perform in-game and in the lore. In Dark Souls 3, they can be found in both Farron Keep and the Untented Graves, with their returned variants of the Great Axe and Ultra Greatsword wielders. Even in a version of the world encapsulated by the dark, the Black Knights still remain. Arguably the most memorable of mini-boss and knight-type enemies in all of Souls, the Black Knights serve as the pinnacle of mini-boss aesthetic and mechanics. From an intimidating armor and presence to the story and legacy in the series, the Black Knights are an iconic element of Dark Souls. The fact that their design can be appreciated to this day is why Dark Souls 1 still matters. Thanks for watching. Are the Black Knights your favorite mini-boss or elite enemy, or is there another from the series that has stood out to you in particular? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing if you enjoy my thoughts on the Souls series as well as other prominent titles from time to time. Thank you for watching, and I pray to Gwyn a Black Knight halberd drops for you in your next run of DS1. Take care.